Thank you so much for the introduction, Ernest. I'm really excited to be here sharing with you about this important topic. I've been a member of the GitLab Heroes program for about 2 years. You can find me on Twitter at MarioGMD. And wow, let's talk about documentation in open source project, something I've learned about this important area of contribution from my experience contributing to open source software for a little more than a decade and being part of a program like Mozilla Open Leaders in the past, is that not only is one of the areas that received more contributions or that the open source project received more contributions, but it is also related with one area that is also important for the project, that is localization. Talking about the kind of documentation that the project must have, especially for if you want to get people involved with your project. I made a checklist about that. These are some of the files that you will find on a Git repository of an open source project. You will have a README where you can place information about how you can if it's related with software, how you can use the tool, how you must configure your dev environment for starting using the application, information about how people can contribute to your project, the code of conduct that is so important, the license. And if we talk about technical documentation, there are different ways and different platforms that you can use for publishing documentation related with the development part of your project. This can be through digital books using platforms like Gitbook, like mdbook, that is a tool that I would like to talk about today, a website for your project, or you can also use configure a blog or use a platform like that for posting information about the technical stuff related with your project. These are some of the tools and platforms that most open source project uses, but these are not the only ones available. Read the Docs is probably the most used related with documentation in open source, but also there are others like GitDoc. One good example to talk about documentation, especially technical documentation, is Foren, the platform that is used for building depth. They are using GitDocs for publishing the developer documentation for the project. You must know that you can take Foren and configure your own platform for your own project. Gitbook, Gitbook is most used for documentation in the form of digital books, but it is not developed as open source. Only the last versions of Gitbook are not developed as open source. It used to be an open source tool, but now it doesn't. And there's an open source tool that is a good alternative to Gitbook. It is open source and it's also developed with Rust, that is mdbook. And this is the tool that the project itself developed for publishing their own documentation. If you go to the official website of Rust and check the documentation, you can find the book, the official book that is published using mdbook. But let me show you some examples of documentation in open source. Well, when I started talking about documentation, I mentioned that one of the areas that receive contributions in open source is also localization. If you want to contribute with documentation, you can help localizing the documentation of the project, especially if you are in a non-English speaking country. I'm from Mexico, so my native language is not English. So one good example of localization projects in open source, and especially related with documentation, is the project that the Python community is working on for translating the official documentation of Python from English to Spanish. That is the one that you are viewing here. And I also mentioned before the technical documentation of Foreign. They are using GitLab for publishing their documentation. And the tool that the Rust project uses for publishing the book that we can check for learning the language is mdbook. This is a tool that the project itself developed, and this is the one that they are using for the official documentation. One project that also uses this tool for its documentation is Redux, that is an operating system developed with Rust. If you go to the documentation section here, you can find the link to the book. And this book is published using mdbook. The documentation of mdbook is also published with the tool itself. Here is the documentation. What I'm going to talk about now is how you can start using this tool for your own project and show you a few examples of how you can use this tool. Well, so for installing mdbook, you can download the binary from the GitHub repository. You can go to the URL that you see here in the slides. I will later share the slides if you want to check the information that I put here. And you can also download from directly from crates.io using cargo by running cargo install mdbook in the terminal or the command line, depending on the operating system that you are using for your project. You can also download directly from the GitHub repository by running cargo install and specifying the Git option and the URL of the GitHub repository. These are the basic commands. The most important one is the one that you use for creating your project with mdbook. That is mdbook init. This command will initialize your project. It will ask you to provide some basic information about your project, and it will create a directory with the name of the name that you assign to your project. And inside this directory, you will have the src directory that will contain the markdown files that are related with the content of the book itself. And well, we also have other files that I will show you in a minute. And when we render the book, we will well, mdbook will create the book directory where the HTML5 files will be the ones that you can take to your server for publishing the documentation of your project. You can also use a tool like GitHub Pages or GitLab Pages for that. I will show you how you can configure GitLab Pages for publishing your project with the CI/CD tool that GitLab provides. Well, talking about the basic commands that we need to know so that we can start building our project with this tool. mdbook build once we finish creating the content of the book. If we want to render the project and that the tool creates the book directory, we must run in the terminal mdbook build. This is the command that we use for rendering the book. And if we want to that mdbook renders the book every time we do any change in the content, we can use mdbook watch. So if we modify any file or we add any file to the project, this mdbook will generate, will render the book and generate the files with the content updated. Another command that we must know, and that is similar to mdbook watch, is mdbook serve. But the difference is that, when you're modifying your project, the tool render the book again every time you make any changes to the project. But you can also watch your project in the browser by going to localhost, and the port that mdbook assigned to the application is this one. An interesting command that mdbook provides is mdbook test. We can use this command for testing the ROS code that we put in the documentation of our project. But if we decide to put code of another language like Python, this command will don't have any effect in the project, as it only works with ROS code. And finally, if we want to clean the files that mdbook generates while rendering the book, we must run mdbook clean. And let me show you. I have an example here, but let's create a project. Sorry. The content of the gitignore file will be the directory that mdbook creates when renders the project, the book directory. So we must add this directory to the gitignore file, so that when we send any changes to the repository, the files there don't sync with your project. And that's why it is important to add this file to the project. Let's assign a title for this. Well, now that the project is created, let's see what the files are, the ones that the tool created. Okay, let me. Okay, wow. I have an example here. Well, these are the files that we will have once we create any project with mdbook. Let's see what is the content of the book toml file. Well, this is basic configuration. We don't have to add any information here, as it will take this information from what the user provides when runs mdbook init, so we don't need to modify this. The language here is ES, as this is a working project of a translation from English to Spanish of the ROS book. But well, let's see what other files we have here. So these are the markdown files that that I'm using for this project. But for specifying the content of the book, we must edit the summary file. And here we add all of the files that we are creating for well, every chapter in the project is a markdown file, so we have to specify every file here in the summary markdown file, and then create any file individually. This is based on the ROS book, so I won't show you that what the content is, but let's try. Let's test some of the commands that I mentioned before. So what we will have here, if we modify any file that is related with the content that we have listed here, any changes will be reflected as the command mdbook will render the book when we make any changes to the content or we create an additional file for that. So this is a translation to Spanish. So this is a small project that I'm working on, but let's see. Well, let's see what the mdbook test does. But as I don't have any ROS code in the project that I'm showing you now, I have a copy here of the ROS book that I cloned from the GitHub repository. So let's see that. If you are already familiar with ROS, you must remember that the book contains pieces of ROS code for explaining the language and the features that provides. So if I run mdbook test, it will check the ROS code in every file that is part of the project. So it will take some finishing this task, but in general, how mdbook for create the documentation for Facebook. Some links. So how can configure for publishing using pages. So why GitLab pages? I've been using it for.
Sorry, could you make some adjustments? Because I think your audio is crackling.
Do you hear me well now?
Hello, do you want to try and say something now?
Yeah, do you hear me well now?
Yes, yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. So why using GitLab pages? I've been using GitLab for about 2 years, and one of the features that I like the most about the platform is that you can publish your websites created with HTML5 or using any static site generator. So it has support for Jekyll if you're coming from GitHub and you uses GitHub pages before. That's my case. I migrated my website from GitHub pages to GitLab pages. It was built using Jekyll, but now it's built with Hugo. I'm using Hugo for building my website. And you can use GitLab pages for, with any static site generator, including mdbook. mdbook is not listed in the official documentation for the tools that it has support, but you can use GitLab pages for publishing a project created with this tool. You can create website for your projects. You can host your site on gitlab.com, or if you want to configure your own GitLab instance, you can also use this feature, and you can use Let's Encrypt for configuring your TLS certificates and use your custom domains for the project, for the website that you are hosting here. These are some of the tools that GitLab Pages has support for. And this is how we configure GitLab CI for publishing a project created with mdbook. I took this configuration file from the documentation of mdbook. If you go to the documentation of mdbook, you can find an instruction for configuring some CI/CD tools, including GitHub, with GitHub Actions, GitLab CI, and I think the other one is Travis CI, but I don't remember well. But you can find information on how you can configure GitLab CI for your project. And you go to my GitLab account, you can find a project that I have hosted there. If you go here, there's a project named Rosbook. And here we find the files of the project. And what is important here is this file, the YAML file for configuring GitLab CI that will contain this. I haven't updated the file with the instructions provided by the project, but this is another way that you can configure GitLab CI for publishing your mdbook project using GitLab pages. So if you go to this repository on my GitLab account, you will find the GitLab CI configuration file that you can copy for your own projects, or you can go to the documentation of mdbook and copy the configuration file for GitLab CI or the platform that you decide to use. So, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. You can find me on Twitter as MarioGMD. You can also find me on Debt. This is my Debt account. Something that I mentioned when I started talking about documentation is that you can also, there are some projects that configure a blog for posting content related with the project itself. And that's what I've been doing for about 2 years, writing some technical blog posts about topics related with ROS, especially with CI/CD. And you can go to my GitLab account if you want to check the repository of the project that I showed you before. Thank you so much.